All righty. We are good to go. Cool. All righty, I will start sharing my screen and we will get rolling. Awesome. All righty, guys, welcome to the UWSP Student Chapter of the Wildlife Society's General Member Meeting. This will be our last speaker of the semester, so thank you all so much for coming. We'll have one more meeting after this, and that'll be our senior send-off and slideshow. So if you still wanted to get on projects, you guys can still pay dues. Those are $5 for the semester, or $8 a year. There's a couple ways to pay that. You can pay online using PayPal with my highlighted email there, or you guys can drop off some cash on my office hour from Mondays 10 to 2 p.m. If you're using PayPal, make sure to use friends and family so you guys don't get charged that extra fee. If you have any questions, myself, Brian, Melinda, happy to help.
So along with dues, you also need to do a hold harmless form and a general membership form to go out on projects. I sent all this stuff out earlier on in the semester. So if you do need it, please feel free to email me and I can send you the forms and such. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Linda. Lizzie.
All right, our conservation topic this week is about how birds are really good at pestering pests. So there's this ongoing study going on in Kenya, and they're trying to determine how much birds impact pest species on coffee farms in Kenya. And the preliminary results they've been finding have shown that, yeah, like birds are making a substantial impact on these pests that are affecting coffee farms. So by encouraging bird diversity, you can basically increase coffee yields because these different birds will eat different bugs, overall helping the coffee farmers. So more research is needed on which bird species eat which pests, but they've been doing this research by analyzing fecal samples from the birds. So they take the poop and basically see what's in it, what bugs are they eating. So I just think this is really cool because it could be potentially applied anywhere. Obviously we have different species here in America, but if we did kind of the same research, figuring out which birds are best for like which crops and kind of target birds to specific pests, we can use that instead of using all these pesticides, which they have their place, but obviously reducing pesticides is never a bad thing. So yeah, really cool stuff. On that note, we'll move on to our quiz bowl. So which of these common birds will readily eat garden pests? We got woodpeckers, warblers, chickadees, bluebirds, orioles, or all of the above.
Votes rolling in. Couple more. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ending it. There's the results.
Yep, you guys got it. They all eat bugs. Whether that's grasshoppers, caterpillars, beetles, like there's a lot of bugs that are considered pests in your garden plants, and by just attracting different species of birds, you can reduce those garden pests. So yeah, really cool stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz.
All right, so I'm actually repping some of my apparel right now, as you can see. We had apparel come in this last week, had our pickup day yesterday. If you missed it, don't worry, we'll still have more opportunities for you. So next Monday, I know it's finals week, but we'll be offering a limited pickup again. So if you know you're gonna be leaving for Christmas break and you need to pick up your apparel, you can stop by the office, which is the TNR 359A, between 10 and noon on next Monday, the 14th. And again, if you are not here on campus, don't worry, we still have your stuff. We'll just have to figure out a day next semester to have another pickup day. So for those of you who haven't grabbed your apparel yet, don't worry, we're not gonna pawn it off or anything.
Alrighty, awesome. Thanks, Lizzie.
And then last thing, here you can see our lovely list of graduating seniors this semester. It's pretty small, If you are a graduating senior for this fall semester, email me. And if you have any embarrassing pictures of Tyler or Bradley, would greatly appreciate them. So you can email any pictures, or if you're graduating, email me. My email is right there on the screen.
Sweet. Alrighty, it's Allison here.
Yes, I am.
Awesome.
Hello, everyone. I'm Allie, and I'm with the CNR Research Symposium Committee. We are in charge of organizing the spring research symposium the CNR holds, and we're hoping to recruit some new people. Specifically, we're hoping for a secretary we have a lot of our members have graduated, and so is our secretary, but we're also looking for some general members. I see my edit didn't make it into the PowerPoint, but we do meet Thursdays at 5 p.m. Some really good reasons why the symposium is very, very rewarding to join is it looks really good on a resume. A lot of employers like to see that you have been there and like looking at like how research is presented, and they like to see that you can like communicate with stakeholders and such. So it looks pretty good on a resume. It's just a really good service to help your peers be able to present all of their hard work. And there's a lot of really cool people in the research symposium and a lot of different backgrounds that you wouldn't normally see just in your classes. So if anybody would be interested in joining the committee, I have our president's email on the slide, Amber. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Melina.
So our last CNR Bible study of the semester is tomorrow. Last week we didn't have anyone come, so we're switching or like having the same topic that we were going to do last week. We're going over how to have strength in stressful situations, and yeah, my email is on the slide there. Also, Megan, the other leader, her email is on the slide. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can email any of us.
Awesome. Thank you, Melina. Nathan or Shelby?
Not sure if Nathan's here, but I'm
Okay.
here. But we're going to be doing a fun event over winter break. And it's a scavenger hunt. But we need some Instagram pages to be featured for clues. So if you're interested in having your Instagram featured in this scavenger hunt, you can email Nathan or me or even DM our Instagram page. So yeah.
Awesome.
And then if you have any cool wildlife photos that you've taken recently in the past, you can send them in to be featured for this week's Spawn on Friday. You can send them in by DMing our Instagram page or by emailing me. Then you can follow our student chapter on multiple platforms. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or even add us on Snapchat. If you ever miss a meeting, our meetings are recorded, so you can find those recordings on our website and our YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelby. All right, so that does it for announcements. Like I said, next week, super sad, senior send-off and slideshow. We're gonna send those seniors off in good fashion. So make sure to come check out all the embarrassing photos and say bye to our few graduating seniors we have this December. But without further ado, we have George Meyer here today. He's the executive director of Wisconsin Wildlife Federation and works a lot with natural resource policies and conservation. So without further ado, George, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Nate. And I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. The Wisconsin Wildlife Federation has had a long and a close relationship with the Wildlife Society student chapter at UW Stevens Point. And let me tell you about the connections, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the Wildlife Federation. And then I'll tell you about a program we'd encourage you all to think about becoming involved in, the Wisconsin Conservation Leadership Corps. The student chapter of the Wildlife Society at Stevens Point has been a member organization of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation at least over 30 years that I can trace it back as an organization. And many of our board members and individuals have been members of I have come through the College of Natural Resources and have been part of the Wildlife Society. In addition, one of our two parts of our mission, and I'll get into our mission a little bit later, is conservation education for youth. And one of our programs are scholarships. And we have given scholarships to the College of Natural Resources for students, well, as long as I know, and this goes back 30 or 40 years. And every year we give $1,000 scholarships to students at CNR. And they vary, but normally it's at least 10 a year, up to 15. We are the largest donor of scholarships to CNR of all the scholarship donors. So we really strongly support your studies and the studies of people in related fields, fisheries, forestry, law enforcement. But obviously many people in wildlife have received that. And we hear back, I mean, there's many individuals at DNR. When I go out and speak at a sports club and there's a wildlife manager there, it's not infrequent that they'll come up and say, oh, by the way, the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation gave me a scholarship when I was back at Point. So we know it's had an impact over the years. Let me tell you a little bit about the Wildlife Federation. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I don't like to spend a lot of time doing it, but I've been involved in conservation for over 50 years, and I'll be retiring formally in July of this year. I worked at the Department of Natural Resources for 32 years and started as a lawyer, actually a law student when I was going to UW Law School, moved in and became a formal lawyer to the department, did a lot of work in implementing the initial parts of the Clean Water Act. Then headed the enforcement division of the department, which had responsibility for both environmental enforcement, conservation law enforcement, Bureau of Environmental Impact, so we did environmental impact statements, and water regulatory programs dealing with alterations of lakes and streams. I did that for a dozen years. Then I became secretary of the agency for 8 years, and then after my term of that was over, I stayed on as an advisor to the secretary for a couple more years. I then had the really wonderful opportunity to teach at Lawrence University for a couple of years in environmental policy and law, and we're probably really one of the most rewarding things I had an opportunity to do as a visiting professor. I then hired on to become the executive director of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, and from about 2003, and now I'll be retiring in 2021. The Wisconsin Wildlife Federation is an organization of largely sports clubs. We have about 6,000 individual members, but we also have over 200 hunting, fishing, trapping, forestry related groups in the state of Wisconsin. And that total membership of those groups is around 80,000 people. The interest of our organization, well, I'll come to that in a minute. As you know, if having been involved in wildlife management at some level, I'm sure you've all come across the North American model of wildlife conservation. And I'm not a scientist. As you know, I'm a lawyer by training. I have an economics degree. I did not grow up in one of the fields you're studying. The one thing I've always appreciated and tried to be a spokesman for, though, is the North American model of wildlife conservation. We enjoy the bounty of what sportsmen and women going back for over 100 years have contributed to wildlife management, fisheries management, habitat, protection of animals, regulations to protect animals. I mean, back at the beginning of the 20th century, many species of wildlife were in serious problem. And organizations across the country, the National Wildlife Federation, of which we are part of, the Isaac Walton League is another one that took the lead and did a couple of things. One, they, on a state level, helped create professional conservation agencies rather than political conservation agencies, and had citizen-based conservation commissions to, in fact, bring science to bear on wildlife management. So it wasn't just a political management of who had the loudest voice to get the regulations more favorable, or whose lake would get stocked and whose wouldn't. So they were very active in trying to make sure there was regulation of their own interest, if you will. They also pushed for funding for conservation. And they're the ones that went in and said, yes, we'd like to have fees, license fees, that are then going to be going to the Conservation Commission or Conservation Department to manage fish and wildlife, to hire wardens, to hire fish managers, to hire wildlife managers to do the work. So they were willing, and part of the conservation model is, in fact, that conservation is largely supported by sportsmen to this day. Doesn't mean there aren't some other funding sources now, but a good portion of the fish and wildlife management of the state, a large portion of it, is still borne by license holders, the sportsmen and women, that buy stamps for various species or general hunting and fishing licenses. So the model believes in professional scientific management, which you, in fact, are going to be furnishing, and helps pay for it, and not to have politics or reduce the amount of politics in conservation. So that's sort of the connection between what you do in sportsmen and women in the state. We have members that aren't sportsmen and women, but want to help support our effort. So we're not just, you don't have to be a sportsman to be part of our organization. We have many of our 6,000 individual members that don't. But the bread and butter, our basic foundation, are sportsmen and women in the state. Getting to the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, we have two parts to our mission. One is conservation education, especially for youth, and I will get to that. I mentioned scholarships. We have many other programs. I'll talk a lot about the Conservation Leadership Corps. And our idea is to foster for the next 2, 3, 4 generations to help bring up, teach youth about the values of conservation and also leadership in conservation, the skills of hunting, fishing, and trapping. But the other part is advocacy. And we do, and a lot of this I do, it comes from my background, do a lot of advocacy before the Department of Natural Resources on their various regulations affecting habitat and regulation of species, from endangered species to game species and everything in between. But also before the state legislature that sets some of the basic statutes that DNR then implements through rules. I spent a significant amount of time in Washington, D.C. because of many aspects, whether it's federal money for land and water conservation. Probably the most understood, less understood conservation bills that affects habitat and wildlife is the Farm Bill, which has money for water quality, but also money to spent on habitat for fish and wildlife. CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, and various other programs that are funded through the Farm Bill. We also work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, whether it's endangered resources or migratory waterfowl. So we do advocacy at all those levels, agencies and elected leaders in Washington and Madison. Now, there are many other excellent conservation organizations in the state that are related to hunting and fishing. We differ from most of those in one respect. And believe me, I'm not I respect and I'm a member of some of these organizations. Many are very species oriented. You have whitetails, you have sturgeon for tomorrow, you have trout unlimited, you have a bear hunters association. You have many very species related groups, but we are involved in the full spectrum of issues. And let's take the conservation side. We work heavily on forestry and parks and outdoor recreation projects. We cover all the species, from butterflies and pollinators to bear management and wildlife management, and every species in between. We're the only group that looks holistically at all the species, fish, wildlife, and in the state and nation. But we also go beyond just the animals themselves. We understand very well that you need to look ecologically at things. We have a very strong environmental committee that works on water quality issues and solid waste issues, toxic waste issues, air pollution issues, all which contribute to the future well-being of fish and wildlife in the state of Wisconsin. Without clean water, you can buy as many fishing licenses as you like. You're not going to have a successful program. So that's what we do from an advocacy standpoint. From a educational standpoint, I'm not going to remember all of our programs. We have our scholarship programs. We have curriculum trunks that we send out to schools from K-12 education. One for bear, one for what is the endangered crane?
Whooping crane.
Whooping crane. Yes, we have one on whooping cranes, one on small mammals, one on bear. That we send out. It's complete curriculum, free of charge to any school in the state, with mock skulls and scat and what they eat and all those kinds of things. Really hands-on furs for the fur bearers. We send kids to summer camp at Suez, which you're all familiar with. We support Kids in Mentoring Outdoors, which is a program which is an organization that takes kids out many times during the course of the year, hands-on, one-on-one mentoring in a wide range of outdoor activities. We have an outdoor skills grant program to our conservation groups, where they put on day-long outdoor skills activities, whether it's archery or angling or the full range of bird watching, whatever, the full range of activities. So we have many different conservation education programs we're involved in. Now we do this with just 2 employees. I have a board of directors that is as large as this group is. We have 55 members on our board of directors. But it works very well because they have very good committees. A lot of decisions get made in committees and then are brought to our board in our bi-monthly meetings. We have a meeting coming up on Saturday, and we'll have a Zoom meeting with as many faces as are on the screen today. The Wildlife Society has had for over 30 years dedicated seats that we put on the board of directors, on our board of directors. And we did that as two opportunities. One is to bring in youth that have some technical skills in fish and wildlife, so they can add their knowledge and their updated knowledge to our decision-making process. And secondly, to provide an opportunity for them to learn how conservation policy is made and how to be advocates and how to have a say in making these kinds of decisions. Every one of the positions I take, whether it's in Congress or at DNR or for the state legislature, gets voted on by our board of directors. We do that through our bi-monthly meetings or annual meeting where we have formal resolutions that get brought up, both that cover many environmental issues, but also fish and wildlife management issues, endangered resource issues, or whatever. The reason I chose to work for the Wildlife Federation after I retired is because it, one, is very effective organization, but also it was the scope. They got the big picture ecologically. It wasn't just one species, which is important, but that's a relatively small niche in what's important in terms of the future of fish and wildlife in the state. You know, we have a very strong position on climate change and all the major, and we took that position back 20, 25 years ago, when a lot of other people weren't talking about it. Lead shot from migratory waterfowl. It was the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation back 30 years ago that became the force that pushed that through as an important issue. When other sports groups wouldn't do it, many of people left other organizations to join the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation so they would have a role in getting a ban on lead shot for migratory waterfowl, as an example. Let me talk a little bit about our other another program though, and before I leave that, 2 representatives from the Wildlife Society on the board are Nate and Tommy Young is the other representative representing your organization and have a say in the decision-making process of the Wildlife Federation. We appreciate them being involved. Nate was also a graduate of what I'm going to talk to you about next, the Wisconsin Conservation Leadership Corps. And he graduated from the last year's class 7. And we are currently have class 8. Last weekend was the second session of that class. And I'm here today to talk to you about it, encouraging, and also to encourage you to think about applying to be in class 9. Shortly after the first of the year, probably in February, I'll be sending out application forms for that class. So they'll be due at the end of May, but I'll make sure Nate gets them, and I'm sure you'll send them out to the full membership. And I'd ask you to consider taking this leadership training program. As I indicated, we're going through our 8th class. We've had anywhere from 12 to 14 students a year. It's open to every private and public college in the state. And we've had virtually every, I think maybe there's only 1 or 2 private schools that have not had sent someone to the program. And I can tell you to a person, the reviews for every one of the sessions in the overall class have been glowing in terms of the evaluation. Why do we do this as an organization? Well, like many conservation organizations, if you look around the room, there's a lot of people with a lot of seniority. That's saying it nicely. And, you know, young people have very busy lives, whether you're going to school, whether you've got a young family. So often people, especially in right out of school or whatever, aren't belonging to organizations. They may not have friends that belong to organizations. And this was an effort to do 2 things. One is to help our organizations bring in new people, and new people bringing new ideas and new skills, social media skills, new knowledge skills from the updated information that you obtain from graduating from CNR, as an example. But the other, and candidly, I think we could say is probably the paramount reason, is to help provide the next generation of conservation leaders. I've been involved for many years. You heard me describe it. So have most of the other people on our board of directors. And we know, you know, I've been in paying jobs, but I can tell you the people on our board of directors are volunteers. They don't get paid a dime. They may get paid gas money. They stay overnight. They get paid for their room, but they volunteer scores of hours every year to conservation, both maybe at their local club that they belong to or at the state level with the Wildlife Federation. They're doing it for the future of their children and their grandchildren, and for the future of fish and wildlife and the legacy of that fish and wildlife in the state. It's part of our culture, it's part of our DNA. And we have this program to help provide leadership so that you and your peers will have an interest in being involved in conservation, to be involved as leaders in your community. You may not be on the board of directors, or you may not be part of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation. You might be part of the Sierra Club or the Audubon Society or the Wisconsin Ornithological Society. If you're interested in herps, any organization, but to be involved. We've had many members from the Conservation Leadership Corps on our board of directors. We currently have about 6 or 7 graduates on our board of directors. And we have many others that are involved in committees, even though they may not be on our board. But we don't do it just to have membership. We're doing it to try to bring the skills that will help young people learn how to have a more major impact on conservation in future years. And that's what we do in our course. To be involved, there's an application to fill out, and there'll be some questions to answer. It's not overly rigorous. It's not a term paper. It's a couple pages with about 4 or 5 questions. Very straightforward, and I'll talk about our website in a minute. You get selected, and there's competition, and there's fairly significant competition. I can tell you we end up with the best of the best. I think of the, and with this year's class, we will hit 100 students. I think only about 2 or 3, I could say with maybe were not the best choices of our in the selection. But I can tell you the others were top notch in terms of quality, and they did an excellent job going through it. I think I think there's great benefits in just learning from other people at different schools across the state, different categories of study, not all in wildlife management, but in various environmental sciences and land use and whatever, forestry. And people have become very close friends and are friends on Facebook and whatever. There actually is a conservation leadership core organization in the state. They formed their own organization, and there's alumni, and they stay in touch with each other. But what the course of study is, it's 4 weekends. And this year, of course, it's being done through this kind of Zoom technology. I'm sure next year, knock on wood, that we have the kind of situation through vaccination and herd immunity that we can start having in-person meetings again. And we're planning on that, God willing. And so next fall, we would start our 9th session. And there's a session in January, and it is about, it would be a Friday evening and a Saturday. And usually we hold it in Stevens Point area, either at a hotel, maybe for the first one, I don't know yet. We haven't made any plans, but at least a couple of them are at Suez, the second and third sessions for sure. And the first session is about leadership. And we bring in some of the top leadership training individuals in the country, anywhere between 2 and 4 instructors who do this on a national level. The lead instructor is a former chair, our chief conservation warden, Randy Stark. He teaches at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Academy in leadership. He does international teaching of conservation wardens and from Asia and Africa. And I won't go into that connection, but he is known nationally. He brings in some other top experts to assist him. And you learn some of the basics of just being leaders. And it'll be important whether you're talking about conservation or your daily lives, the skills that you'll learn. The second session, and we just went through that, is an advocacy training program. And what we do is we bring in some individuals who have been involved in conservation policy advocacy. And some people, the top people in the state of Wisconsin that have been involved in that. And you'll get some instruction, but then after that, it's very interactive. There is a scenario of a real live policy situation, a bill that went through the legislature a couple times in Wisconsin involving iron mining in the Pinocchio mine. It was a very controversial bill. And what you do is you'll be assigned roles from those that are in favor of the mine and have economic interest, and those that have conservation interest, or next door neighbors, farmers, tribal chairmen from the tribe that's downstream of the proposed mine. Very realistic situation. And you learn about some of the skills of being an effective advocate. And these skills, while we talk about them in terms of conservation, are also applicable in just about anything you do, anything you're advocating for, whether it's talking, trying to convince people to elect you to be president of the Wildlife Society, to trying to negotiate with a new car, just the kind of advocacy skills you'd have. Obviously, we're thinking about it in terms of conservation. and you have a meeting with a mock meeting with a state senator. There's a mock legislative hearing, very realistic of what you would experience in real life, whether you go to a state council or Congress or the state legislature. At the end of that meeting, the group looks at various issues that you're individually concerned about in terms of conservation. What you perceive to be a problem or something that needs fixing, or attention or an opportunity. And let me get to the bottom line and I'll backtrack. Eventually at our annual meeting, which is usually in April, you would be presenting a resolution on a conservation issue, a policy that you've studied, and I'll backtrack into that, and believe should be dealt with from a advocacy standpoint, that the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation should take a role to try to solve the issue. And it can be a fish and wildlife issue, it can be an issue regarding habitat for pollinators, it can be in terms of renewable energy, it can be in terms of habitat, whatever. But at the end of that second session I talked about, you'll select your topics and everybody gets to say, well, I think we should do this. And I think we ended up Saturday with about 12 to 14 items on a list. And then it gets selected down to 4 topics. And you form teams of 3. So there'd be 3 people on a team that are going to work on developing a resolution, which is like doing factual research and then coming up with what they think the solution is to deal with the problem that they looked into. At the third session, they would be writing the resolution. And what I do in between is look up a coach for them to work with and find somebody that may be an expert in pollinators to work with them. Or we had, use an example for last year, one of the issues was trying to get away from salt nuggets for pellets, for putting on roads for reducing ice in Wisconsin, which end up with a lot of salt going into our lakes and streams. And communities have started going to a sort of a salt brine, which has a lot less salt content, but it's actually, in most situations, is more effective. And the resolution basically was to educate local counties and municipalities to make the switch over from pellets to brine. So I brought in a expert who is an advocate for this from Brown County Transportation Department. And that person, as an example, I'll use this as an example, provided some areas that they could do research, but the main research would be done by the students in the program. He may be a resource, or she may be a resource to help find additional references. But as the drafting takes place, to be able to bounce ideas off, to make sure you come up with a practical result and one that's economically feasible and something that could be carried out and is generally something that may be saleable from a policy standpoint. And that's a job I'll be functioning over the next couple of weeks to get the coaches for Class 8. So I had in the third session, they're doing the drafting, and at least come out of that session with a rough draft, fine tune it via electronic email or whatever over a couple of months, and then present it at our annual meeting, which stand up. Well, it'd be Zoom. By your class would stand up in front of our annual meeting and make the presentation of the resolution, answer questions, and then gets voted on. It actually becomes a policy of the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation and one that we work on to support. So this isn't just an academic exercise. This is one that has there's something real that comes out of it besides the educational experience. Now that's sort of the overview of the program. It's free of charge. Any transportation related to getting to the site, obviously, if it's in Stevens Point, that would be minimal, but say at Suez is covered. Any of the lodging, any of the food expenses, any of the materials, the instructors are donating their time. We may, if they ask for it, we obviously pay for their expenses, but that is free of charge. At the end of the session, you get a certificate of completion of this program. And we give a $250 scholarship, a little financial reward for having attended the program. Let me turn it over to Nate. And if you could give your impressions of the program and your experiences from last year.
Yeah, so CLC is awesome. The best part about it to me, so in our curriculum here at UWSP, we don't get the policy side. So how do we go from an idea about how to do something better to getting an actual law or policy made about it? And that is what the CLC is about. So not only is it giving you leadership skills on how to be a better communicator, be a better leader in groups, you're also now using those leadership skills to get an idea that you had passed as a serious law or policy. So it's extremely, extremely important to have these skills. And yeah, like I said, that curriculum isn't in UWSP. So this paired so well being a student, wildlife student, and then getting that policy side of it. So like he was talking about that mock meeting. I mean, there was lawyers from the Department of Natural Resources there, and they're grilling you, and you're just supposed to put on this persona of a person that you've never met before. So I was a minor, so I was put on a side that I wouldn't typically be put on. So you're learning these new perspectives, and it really opens your mind up, and you really learn a lot about the actual workings of the world, I guess I'd say. So yeah, like we all love conservation. Everybody in this room wants to save all the species, but you can't just have that idea. You have to be able to enact those ideas, and the CLC really gives you the tools to do that. So that is what I'd say the best part about the CLC is.
Nate brought up a very important thing. And obviously you're in the hard sciences. My background was social sciences, law and economics. My predecessor secretary was Buzz Bazadny, and he had a saying, and it's very true. Natural resource management or wildlife management, there's two components to it. The easiest is the scientific management. You will understand population dynamics and all the various studies and research that is going to how to deal with habitat, how to do, with managing various species and regulate what kind of, from a biological standpoint, what is important and what isn't. And as you deal with it is the social sciences. The best scientific regulation may not ever get implemented because it's socially unacceptable. It's the human side of it. You have to have the combination of human management to be effective as a wildlife manager. And that's often more policy. That's where the policy comes in and how, what policy will work. what type of regulation will get the support of the citizens that are going to have the final say ultimately in terms of how wildlife do. Let's talk about deer management. In this state, the great majority of deer habitat is on private land. And you can set all kinds of quotas and numbers for management of deer. But if a landowner says, I'm not going to allow does to be hunted on my property, you're not going to be successful at deer management in the state. You're going to end up with an overpopulation of deer. You have to be able to deal with the human side of it, the social manager side of it. And that's where policy often plays a major role in coming up with that kind of policy where you have citizen buy-in, you have legislative buy-in, because that legislative buy-in is going to reflect what the citizens and their voters think. So it's important to have, as Nate said, this kind of perspective. So as you approach management, you always ask the question, is this something that will work? Will the people that are going to have a major impact on the successful management of bear or whooping crane or whatever, can we come up with policies that they will accept and hopefully not just tolerate, but enthusiastically tolerate? When it comes financially, sportsmen, we talked about it earlier, are very willing to open up their wallet if they can see sound habitat management programs in organizations like Trout Unlimited or Ducks Unlimited or Wisconsin Waterfowl Association have very enthusiastic members that open up their wallets a lot and write some large checks because they believe in it. And the idea, and there are many other people that endangered resources that are willing to make that check on their tax form or put that license plate on their car. And that's because of social management and coming up with ideas and having the mindset to think about how what you're proposing will be acceptable, not just from a scientific standpoint, but a social standpoint. RNA's issue right now that is going to be really coming to the fore over the next year is updating the wolf management plan in the state. I can tell you the science of wolf management is an easy science in terms of what the habitat is and what the ecological, biological carrying capacity of the state. It is not rocket science anymore. The science has been done on that. But the social carrying capacity of an apex predator is the hard part. And that's going to be a major discussion in the state, whether you're a farmer or if you're a hound hunter and your hounds have been come across a rendezvous site and you lost some hounds, whether your pet dog is out in the backyard and maybe shouldn't have been there, but it was, and it's not there anymore. That's going to be the hard part. And you'll learn some of these skills in this program that you need to be thinking broader than just the science. So I encourage you all to think about it. And I know time's getting on. In January, I'll get the information out to Nate, get it out to you. We've had several students from UWSP. Usually there's a sizable number that are applicants and get into the class, and I encourage you all to think about it. I think you'll find it's a important broadening of your educational perspective. So let me toss it back to you. Glad to answer any questions if you have time for that. Or
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, George. I will stop our live stream here. And if you guys have some questions,